The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen wasteland of northern Alaska, carrying with it tiny shards of ice that felt like needles against exposed skin. Dr. Marcus Webb pulled his thermal hood tighter around his face, squinting through his goggles at the massive glacial formation that had been their focus for the past 3 weeks. The research station sat like a tiny metal island in an ocean of white, its lights barely visible through the perpetual twilight that passed for daylight this far north in late winter. Marcus had spent the better part of his career studying climate change and ancient ecosystems, but nothing could have prepared him for what they were about to unleash on the world. Right now, though, all he could think about was getting back inside before his fingers went numb, even through the expensive insulated gloves that the university had provided. His team of 7 researchers had been stationed at Outpost Delta for nearly a month, drilling ice cores and documenting the alarming rate of glacial melt in one of the most remote and hostile environments on the planet. "Yo, Doc, you gonna stand out there until you become part of the landscape, or what?" The voice crackled through his radio, tinged with the unmistakable Brooklyn accent of Tommy Ricci, their equipment specialist and the closest thing the team had to comic relief in this frozen hell. Marcus couldn't help but crack a smile beneath his face covering. Tommy had a way of cutting through the monotony and isolation that could drive people crazy up here. "I'm heading back now," Marcus responded, his breath creating clouds of vapor that froze almost instantly. "Tell Jessica I'll need about 20 minutes to thaw out before we review today's data." He turned away from the glacier, his boots crunching on the packed snow, and began the 200-yard trek back to the station. The structure wasn't much to look at, just a series of connected modules that had been airlifted in pieces and assembled on site, but it was home for now, and more importantly, it was warm. Inside the main research module, Jessica Thompson was hunched over her laptop, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes scanning the thermal imaging data they'd collected from the latest drilling site. As the team's lead geologist, she'd been the first to notice the anomalies in the ice samples, strange pockets of perfectly preserved organic matter that shouldn't exist at the depths they were finding them. "This doesn't make any sense," she muttered, zooming in on a particularly weird reading. Beside her, Brandon Hayes, their biologist, leaned in to get a better look. Brandon was fresh out of grad school, eager and maybe a little too enthusiastic about everything, which sometimes grated on the others but mostly just made them feel old. "What are we looking at?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. Jessica tapped the screen with her pen. "These thermal signatures. See how they're clustered? That's not random. It's almost like, I don't know, like something was deliberately placed there." "Maybe it's just frozen wildlife," Brandon suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't really believe that. "We've found preserved animals in ice before. Remember that woolly mammoth in Siberia?" Jessica shook her head. "Wrong depth, wrong temperature gradient, and the distribution is too uniform. Whatever this is, it's been here a really, really long time. I'm talking centuries, maybe longer." Before Brandon could respond, the external airlock hissed, and Marcus stumbled through, looking like a snow-covered yeti. He began the process of delayering, peeling off the heavy outer gear and hanging it on the designated hooks. "It's getting worse out there," he announced to no one in particular. "Winds picking up, temperatures dropping. We might be looking at a whiteout situation by tonight." Tommy emerged from the equipment bay, wiping grease from his hands onto an already dirty rag. "The generators are running smooth, and we got enough fuel for at least 2 weeks, even if we get buried. We'll be fine." Across the module, in the small kitchen area, Riley Patterson was attempting to make something edible out of their dwindling supply of freeze-dried rations. As the team's logistics coordinator, Riley took it personally when supplies ran low or morale dipped, which meant she was constantly trying to improve their living conditions in small ways. "Dinner's gonna be beef stroganoff tonight," she called out, reading from a package that was probably older than Brandon. "And by stroganoff, I mean brown mush with noodles. Living the dream up here, folks." Next to her, Derek Chen, their communications tech, was fiddling with the satellite array controls, trying to boost their signal strength. They'd been experiencing intermittent connectivity issues for the past few days, which wasn't unusual given their location, but it was getting worse. "Hey, Marcus, when's our next supply drop scheduled?" Derek asked without looking up from his work. Marcus checked his watch, then the calendar on the wall. "Should be 3 days. Why, we running low on something critical?" Derek shook his head. "Nah, just want to make sure the weather clears enough for them to make it through. I'm seeing some gnarly storm systems building to the west. Could mess with the schedule." The seventh member of their team, Amanda Kowalski, pushed through the door from the living quarters, looking like she'd just woken up despite it being late afternoon. As their medical officer and secondary researcher, Amanda had been pulling double shifts analyzing the biological samples they'd been extracting from the ice. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested too much coffee and not enough sleep. "Someone please tell me there's coffee," she said, making a beeline for the kitchen. "Fresh pot, made it about an hour ago," Riley replied, stepping aside to let Amanda access the coffee maker. "You look like hell, by the way. Maybe he's up on the all-nighters?" Amanda poured herself a large mug and took a long drink before responding. "Can't. Those samples we pulled yesterday? They're unlike anything I've ever seen. The cellular structure is intact, like whatever's frozen in there just fell asleep instead of dying. It's incredible." Marcus's attention shifted immediately. "What do you mean, intact? That shouldn't be possible at those temperatures and that age." Amanda set her mug down and leaned against the counter. "That's what I thought too, but I've run the tests 3 times. Whatever preservation process happened here, it's beyond anything we understand. The cell walls are undamaged, the DNA is readable, and get this, there are trace amounts of electrical activity." The room went silent except for the hum of the generators and the whistle of wind outside. Brandon was the first to speak. "Electrical activity? That's impossible. These samples are hundreds, maybe thousands of years old. There can't be any viable cellular function." "I know what I'm seeing," Amanda insisted, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "I'm not saying it's alive, but it's not completely dead either. It's like suspended animation or something." Jessica closed her laptop and stood up. "We need to see this. All of us. If what you're saying is true, this could be the biggest discovery in decades." The team gathered in the small laboratory module, cramming into the space that was really only designed for 2 people to work comfortably. Amanda had several ice samples laid out under microscopes and in containment dishes, connected to various monitoring equipment that blinked and beeped softly. She pulled up the data on the main monitor, showing graphs and readings that meant little to most of them but caused Marcus to lean in closer, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. These readings are from sample Delta 7, extracted from approximately 18 meters down, estimated age between 500 and 800 years old, Amanda explained, falling into presentation mode. "Now watch this." She activated a thermal probe, gradually increasing the temperature of one of the samples by a few degrees. At first, nothing happened, but then the monitors began showing increased activity. The electrical impulses, faint as they were, became more regular, almost rhythmic. "Holy crap," Tommy whispered, and for once nobody laughed at his commentary because they were all thinking the same thing. "It's responding to temperature change," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it? Animal? Human?" Amanda switched to a microscopic camera feed, showing the cellular structure magnified hundreds of times. The cells were strange, malformed in some way, not quite matching any known biological pattern. "That's the thing," she said quietly. "The DNA is human, or it was at one point. But there's something else mixed in, something I can't identify. It's like the cells were infected with something before they froze." Derek, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Infected with what?" Amanda shrugged. No idea. Nothing in any database I can access from here. We'd need to get these samples back to a real lab with better equipment to figure that out. The wind outside suddenly intensified, rattling the module's walls hard enough to make everyone pause. Marcus checked his watch again. Storm's coming in faster than expected. Derek, can you get a message out to base camp? Let them know we might lose communication for a while. Derek nodded and headed back to the communications module while the others continued examining Amanda's findings. Jessica was studying the thermal data again, her expression troubled. Marcus, look at this pattern. See how the samples are distributed in the ice. It's not random. It's almost like they were part of something bigger, something that broke apart over time. Like what? Brandon asked. Like bodies, Jessica said flatly. I think we've been drilling into a mass grave. The implications of that statement settled over the room like a cold fog. Riley was the first to voice what they were all thinking. Who the hell buries people in a glacier? And more importantly, why? Marcus was already running through historical possibilities in his head. There are legends from the indigenous peoples up here, stories about sickness and death, about entire villages that had to be abandoned. Most scholars dismissed them as myth or exaggeration, but maybe there was truth to them. Amanda was nodding slowly. That would explain the infection pattern I'm seeing. If there was some kind of epidemic, and they didn't know how to stop it, isolating the victims in ice would be a logical solution. Crude, but effective. Effective until the ice melts, Tommy added darkly. Before anyone could respond to that unsettling thought, Derek came rushing back in, his face pale. We got a problem. Big problem. I just got a message from the geological survey team at Station Gamma, about 40 miles west of here. They've gone dark. No communication for the last 6 hours. Marcus frowned. Could just be equipment failure or the storm. Derek shook his head. Their last transmission was weird. The operator sounded scared, said something about movement in the ice and people acting strange, then the line cut out. I've been trying to raise them ever since, nothing. The team exchanged worried glances. Station Gamma had a crew of 5, experienced researchers who knew how to handle themselves in extreme conditions. For them to just go silent was concerning, especially with a storm coming in. How far did you say they were? Marcus asked. 40 miles, give or take. In this weather, might as well be 400. No way anyone's going anywhere until this blows over. Marcus made a decision. Okay, here's what we're doing. We secure the station for the storm, make sure all the external equipment is locked down and we have emergency protocols ready. Once the weather clears, we'll try to establish contact with Gamma again. If we can't reach them, we'll have to report it when the supply drop comes. It was a sensible plan, the kind of by-the-book response that Marcus was known for, but something about the situation felt wrong to all of them. They spent the next few hours battening down the hatches, so to speak, securing everything that could be secured and double-checking their supplies. The storm hit in earnest just after dinner, transforming the world outside into a swirling white chaos where visibility dropped to 0 and the wind sounded like a living thing trying to tear the station apart. They gathered in the common area, nobody really wanting to be alone while nature raged outside. Riley had broken out the playing cards, and a half-hearted game of poker was underway, more for distraction than actual entertainment. Amanda had returned to her lab, unable to leave the samples alone, while Derek monitored the communications equipment and weather data. Winds hitting about 70 miles per hour, he reported. Temperatures dropped to -45. We're gonna be socked in for at least 18 to 24 hours. Marcus was staring at the weather display, but his mind was elsewhere, thinking about Station Gamma, about the strange samples in their ice cores, about Amanda's findings. It all felt connected somehow, though he couldn't quite piece together how. Hey Doc, you in or out? Tommy's voice broke through his thoughts. Marcus looked down to realize he was still holding his cards from the last hand. Sorry, I'm out. Think I'm gonna call it a night. He retreated to his small private quarters, really just a bunk with a privacy curtain and enough space for a small desk, and pulled out his laptop. Despite the storm, their internal network was still functioning, so he had access to all their research data. He started pulling up historical records, searching for anything about epidemics or mass deaths in this region dating back 500 to 1,000 years. Most of the indigenous peoples didn't keep written records that far back, but there were oral histories that had been documented by anthropologists and historians. He found several references to a winter sickness that supposedly swept through the northern regions sometime in the late 1400s or early 1500s. The accounts were fragmentary and often contradictory, but certain details appeared consistently. The sick became violent and aggressive, they didn't respond to normal treatments, they seemed impervious to cold, and eventually entire communities disappeared. Most scholars had attributed these stories to harsh winters, starvation, and the tendency of oral traditions to exaggerate over time. But what if there was more to it? What if something real had happened, something so terrible that the survivors had no choice but to entomb the victims in ice and hope the cold would keep whatever killed them contained forever? Marcus was so absorbed in his research that he didn't notice the time until Derek's voice came over the intercom. Guys? I'm getting some weird readings on the motion sensors. External, on the north side of the station. Everyone who'd been trying to sleep was suddenly wide awake. Marcus emerged from his quarters to find the others gathering around Derek's monitoring station. What kind of readings? He asked. Derek pointed to his screen, where several sensors were showing intermittent activity. Could be ice buildup or equipment malfunction from the storm, but the pattern's weird. It's moving. Moving like wind-blown debris? Jessica asked. Moving like walking, Derek said quietly. Tommy laughed, but it sounded forced. Dude, there's nothing out there that could walk in this storm. You said yourself it's -45 with 70-mile-per-hour winds. We can barely stand outside in good weather. Derek pulled up the camera feeds, but the storm made them almost useless, just walls of white static with occasional dark shapes that could be anything. I know what I'm seeing on these sensors. Something's out there, and it's close to the station. Amanda had joined them, looking worried. Could it be the team from Gamma? Maybe they tried to evacuate and got lost in the storm? Marcus considered it. 40 miles in this weather? They'd have to be insane to try it, but if they were desperate enough. He made a decision. Derek, try hailing them on all frequencies. If someone's out there, we need to guide them to the airlock. Derek began broadcasting on every channel they had, voice and emergency beacon, calling out into the storm. The motion sensors continued to show activity, whatever it was getting closer to the main module. Then, over the howl of the wind, they heard it, a sound that definitely wasn't natural, a scraping, scratching noise against the outer hull. They're here! Riley exclaimed, moving toward the airlock. Wait, Marcus commanded, something in his gut telling him to be cautious. Protocol first. Derek, try to get a visual. Amanda, get the medical bay ready in case someone's injured. Tommy, Riley, help me gear up. We don't open that door until we know what we're dealing with. The scratching continued, now accompanied by a sound that might have been pounding, like someone trying to get in. Derek cycled through camera angles, trying to find one that would give them a clear view, but the storm was too intense. I can't see anything definitive, but whatever's out there is right outside the airlock. Marcus was pulling on his cold weather gear, his hands shaking slightly, though whether from cold or adrenaline he couldn't tell. The scratching was getting more insistent, almost frantic. Someone's in trouble, Riley said. We have to help them. She was right, of course. They couldn't just leave someone outside to freeze, even if something felt off about the whole situation. Marcus finished gearing up and moved to the airlock control panel. Everyone who's not in cold weather gear, get back to the interior modules and seal the hatches. Derek, keep trying to raise them on radio. If this is our people or the Gamma team, they should be able to respond. But there was no response on any frequency, just static in the endless howl of wind. Marcus looked at Tommy, who'd also suited up, and Riley, who'd insisted on being part of the response team. Ready? They nodded, and Marcus initiated the airlock sequence. The outer door could only be opened from inside as a safety feature, preventing people from accidentally locking themselves out. As the seal broke, the storm tried to force its way in, wind and snow blasting through the opening. Marcus leaned into the wind, his high-powered flashlight cutting through the swirling white. "Hello? We're here to help. Identify yourself." For a moment, there was nothing but the storm. Then a shape emerged from the white, stumbling toward the light. Marcus's first impression was relief. Someone had indeed been out there and was now safe. But as the figure got closer, relief transformed into confusion and then horror. The person was wearing outdated clothing, not modern cold-weather gear but animal skins and crude furs that looked like they belonged in a museum. Their movements were wrong too, jerky and uncoordinated, like a puppet being controlled by someone who'd never seen a human walk before. And their face, God, their face was wrong, skin gray and mottled with dark veins, eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like an animal's. "What the hell?" Tommy breathed beside him, and Marcus realized his friend was seeing the same impossible thing he was. The figure lurched closer, and Marcus saw its mouth open, revealing broken teeth and a jaw that seemed to unhinge slightly, far wider than should be possible. A sound emerged from its throat, not words, not quite a scream, something between a growl and a rattle. "Close the door!" Marcus shouted, but even as he did, two more figures appeared behind the first, then another, and another, all wearing the same ancient clothing, all moving with that same horrible wrongness. Riley was already hitting the door controls, but the first figure had reached the threshold, one arm extending into the airlock with unnatural speed. Its hand clamped onto Tommy's arm with enough force to make him cry out even through the heavy clothing. "Get it off me!" Tommy yelled, trying to pull away, but the thing's grip was iron. Marcus didn't think, just reacted, grabbing the emergency fire axe mounted near the airlock and swinging it at the arm holding Tommy. The blade connected with a sound like chopping frozen wood, and the creature's arm came partially free, but it didn't react to the injury the way a human would. There was no scream of pain, barely any blood, just a slight stumble before it renewed its grip with its other hand. "It's not letting go." Tommy was panicking now, and Marcus couldn't blame him because the thing's face was inches from the opening, that impossibly wide mouth trying to reach through the narrowing gap as Riley fought to close the door. Marcus swung again, this time at the fingers gripping Tommy's jacket, and the hand finally released. Tommy fell backward as the airlock door slammed shut, the heavy seals engaging with a hiss. Outside, they could hear the creatures pounding on the hull, that scratching sound now multiplied and coming from multiple directions. Inside the station, alarms were blaring, and the rest of the team was shouting questions all at once. Marcus helped Tommy to his feet, checking him for injuries. "You bit? Scratched? Any broken skin?" Tommy shook his head, breathing hard. "No, I don't think so. Just bruised." "What the hell were those things?" That was the question, wasn't it? Marcus's mind was racing, trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. Ancient clothing, preserved in ice, violent behavior, the infection pattern Amanda had found in the samples. "Everyone, get to the common area now," he ordered, his voice carrying enough authority that the team obeyed without question. Once they were all gathered, Marcus took a breath and laid out his theory. "Those things outside, I think they're connected to the samples we've been finding in the ice. I think they're people, or they used to be people, who were infected with something centuries ago." "That's impossible," Brandon said, but his voice wavered. "People can't survive frozen for that long." Amanda was pale but thinking. Not survive, but preservation at those temperatures could halt all biological processes. If the glacier's been melting due to climate change, then whatever was locked away is thawing out, Jessica finished. Like opening a time capsule from hell. Derek was still at his monitors, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "Guys, the motion sensors are going crazy. Those things, whatever they are, they're all around the station now. I'm counting at least 20 distinct signatures. 20. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. How? Where did they all come from? Amanda spoke up, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The glacier. Remember what Jessica said about the distribution pattern? If there were bodies frozen in the ice and it's melting, they could be emerging all along the glacial face. We might be seeing just a small fraction of what's actually out there. The implications were staggering. If she was right, and the warming climate was releasing these infected frozen people across the Arctic regions, this wasn't just their problem. This was a potential global catastrophe. We need to contact base camp, get help up here, Riley said. Derek was already trying, but he shook his head. No good. Storm's still too heavy, and I think the creatures outside damaged the satellite array. I'm not getting any signal out. They were cut off, surrounded by hostile forces in one of the most remote places on Earth, with a storm raging that prevented any escape or rescue. Marcus forced himself to think past the panic. Okay, we secure the station, make sure there's no way they can get in. Derek, can you do a complete diagnostic on all the external sensors and cameras? I want to know exactly where they are at all times. Amanda, I need you to think about what we're dealing with biologically. Is there a way to stop them, kill them, I don't know, freeze them again? Tommy had been quiet since the encounter, but now he spoke up. They felt solid, man. When that thing grabbed me, it wasn't like grabbing a person. It was like being grabbed by a machine, no give, no warmth, just cold strength. Brandon was pulling up his laptop. If they've been frozen for centuries, their tissues would be fundamentally altered. Ice crystal formation would have destroyed normal cellular structure, but if Amanda's right about the preservation, maybe the infection prevented that damage somehow. They could be operating on a completely different biological basis than we understand. Great, so we're dealing with frozen zombie people that science can't explain. This is fine. Everything's fine, Riley said, her tone edging toward hysteria. Jessica put a hand on her shoulder. We're gonna be okay. This station was built to withstand extreme conditions. As long as we stay inside and stay smart, we can outlast the storm and call for help. But even as she said it, a horrible grinding noise echoed through the station, metal on metal, coming from somewhere below them. Marcus checked the station schematic on the nearest tablet. That's coming from the equipment bay. What's down there that they could damage? Tommy's face went white. The fuel storage in the main generator. If they breach that. He didn't need to finish. Without the generators, the station would lose heat and power. In these temperatures, they'd have maybe a few hours before the cold became lethal. We have to stop them, Marcus said, grabbing the fire axe again. Tommy, Riley, grab any tools that can be used as weapons. Amanda, see if we have anything chemical that might slow them down, fuel, solvents, anything. Brandon and Jessica, help Derek monitor their movements. We need to know if they breached the lower level. The team sprang into action, the immediate crisis overriding their fear. Marcus led the way down to the equipment bay, which was accessed through a narrow stairwell that connected the modules. The grinding noise was louder here, and through the small porthole window on the exterior door, he could see movement, shapes pressing against the reinforced glass. They're trying to pry open the maintenance hatch, Tommy said, pointing to where the external access panel was visibly shaking. That hatch was designed to withstand polar bears and storm damage, not determine attackers with nothing to lose. Marcus examined the door's integrity. It was holding for now, but the creatures outside seemed to have no concept of pain or exhaustion. They would keep trying until they broke through or found another way in. Can we reinforce it from inside? Tommy looked around the equipment bay, his engineer's mind assessing options. Maybe. We could weld some of these storage racks across the door, create a secondary barrier. But if they get through the outer hatch, we'd need to seal off this entire section, which means cutting off access to the main generator for manual maintenance. It was a terrible choice, but one they might have to make. Do it, Marcus decided. We'll prep the secondary generator in the main module as a backup. It won't run everything, but it'll keep us alive. While Tommy and Riley got to work on reinforcing the door, Marcus headed back up to check on the others. Amanda met him in the common area, holding several containers of what looked like industrial chemicals. "I've got degreaser, emergency fuel, and some cleaning supplies that are basically pure alcohol. If we need to create fire or some kind of chemical deterrent, this should work." "Good thinking," Marcus said, taking the containers and setting them in a central location where everyone could access them. Derek called out from his monitoring station. "Marcus, you need to see this." Marcus moved to look over Derek's shoulder. The communications tech had managed to get a few of the exterior cameras working, and what they showed made Marcus's blood run cold. The creatures weren't just attacking the station randomly. They were working together, coordinated in a way that suggested some kind of collective intelligence. Several were prying at the maintenance hatch while others circled the perimeter, testing other potential entry points. "They're hunting," Derek said quietly. "Like a pack." Jessica had pulled up the thermal imaging, and it showed even more disturbing information. Their body temperature is barely above ambient. Most of them are registering around -30 degrees. They should be frozen solid, but their moving like temperature doesn't affect them at all. Brandon was frantically searching through medical and biological databases on his laptop. "I might have found something. There are records of a condition called cryobiosis, where organisms can survive freezing through specialized biological processes. Certain frogs and insects can do it naturally. But in humans, in mammals, it's only theoretical." Amanda joined them, looking at Brandon's screen. "Unless the infection causes cryobiosis as part of its life cycle. Some parasites dramatically alter their host's biology. If this thing, whatever it is, allows its hosts to survive freezing, then it could remain dormant for centuries and reactive when conditions change. Like warming temperatures," Marcus said, the full horror of the situation becoming clear. "Climate change isn't just melting ice and raising sea levels. It's releasing things that should have stayed buried forever." The grinding noise from below intensified, followed by a sharp crack that echoed through the station. Tommy's voice came over the intercom, tight with stress. "We've got a problem. The outer hatch is giving way. We need to evacuate this level now." Marcus hit the intercom button. "Get out of there. Seal the section." He could hear running footsteps on the metal stairs as Tommy and Riley evacuated the equipment bay. Tommy's hands were shaking as he reached the main level. "We got the reinforcements up, but I don't know how long they'll hold. Those things are strong, way stronger than they should be." Derek was watching the camera feed from the equipment bay. Several creatures had breached the outer hatch and were now attacking the improvised barrier Tommy had erected. Their movements were relentless, mechanical, showing no signs of fatigue. "How long until they break through?" Marcus asked. Tommy wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "That welding job was quick and dirty. Maybe an hour, maybe less." Marcus looked at his team, seeing the fear in their eyes but also determination. They were scientists, thinkers, not fighters, but they were also survivors who'd volunteered to work in one of the harshest environments on Earth. If anyone could figure a way out of this, it was them. "Okay, new plan. We prepare for breach. Derek, is there any way to overload the electrical systems in the equipment bay, create some kind of shock or surge that might disable them?" Derek considered it. "Maybe. The bay has its own power distribution. If I reroute enough juice through the metal deck plating, anything touching it would get one hell of a jolt. But it would drain our batteries fast, and we'd have to do it remotely since anyone in there would get fried too." "Set it up," Marcus ordered. "Jessica, help him. Amanda and Brandon, I need you to keep working on the biological angle. There has to be a weakness, something we can exploit. Riley, do an inventory of everything we have that could be used for defense or escape. Tommy, you're with me. We're going to prep the escape vehicle just in case." The station had a single emergency vehicle, essentially a heavily modified snowmobile with an enclosed cab and enough fuel to reach the nearest outpost about 60 miles away. Using it in this storm would be suicidal, but staying here while the creatures broke through might be worse. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, some crucial piece of information that would make sense of all this. He thought about Station Gamma, about their last transmission mentioning movement in the ice and people acting strange. Derek, before we lost contact with Gamma, did they mention anything specific about what they were seeing? Derek pulled up the communication logs. Just what I told you before. The operator, I think it was Jim Kowalski, said they'd noticed some of their ice samples thawing faster than expected, and then one of their team members started acting weird, aggressive, and confused. The transmission cut off after that. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Acting weird how? Like infected? Could one of their team have been exposed to whatever this is? Amanda had been listening. If the infection can survive in the ice and reactivate with warming, then handling contaminated samples without proper protocol. She didn't finish, but she didn't have to. The Gamma team might not have been attacked from outside. They might have been infected from within, by their own research. We need to check our samples, Marcus said urgently. Everything we've brought inside. If there's any chance of contamination. They rushed to the laboratory module where Amanda had been working. The ice core samples were stored in specialized freezer units, but Amanda had been warming several for study. Marcus's heart sank as he saw one of the containment dishes had cracked, likely from being moved hastily during the initial panic, and a small amount of melted sample water had leaked onto the work surface. Please tell me nobody touched that, Marcus said. Amanda was checking her notes. I was wearing gloves the whole time, and I cleaned up a spill earlier, but I don't think it was from that dish. Marcus looked at the team assembled in the small space. Everyone who's been in this lab in the last 24 hours, I need you to think carefully. Any cuts, scratches, any possible exposure to the samples? Brandon raised his hand hesitantly. I had a hangnail yesterday. I don't think I touched anything directly, but I was helping Amanda move some equipment. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Where's the hangnail now? Brandon pulled off his glove and examined his hand. The area around his nail bed was red and slightly swollen, but it could have been normal irritation. Or it could have been the beginning of an infection. How do you feel? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Brandon shrugged. Fine, I guess. A little tired, but we've all been pulling long hours. Tired could mean a lot of things, but it could also be a symptom. Marcus made a decision he hated making. Amanda, I need you to isolate Brandon, take blood samples, monitor his vitals. If there's any change, anything at all, we need to know immediately. Brandon's eyes widened. You think I'm infected? Come on, it's just a hangnail. And it's probably nothing, Marcus agreed, but we can't take chances. You understand that, right? Brandon looked like he wanted to argue, but he was a scientist. He understood protocols. Reluctantly, he nodded and followed Amanda to the medical bay. The rest of the team stood in the corridor, processing this new nightmare. It was bad enough having the creatures outside trying to get in. The thought that one of their own might be turning into one of those things was almost too much to bear. Tommy broke the silence. This is seriously messed up, man. This is like every horror movie ever made, and we're the idiots who stayed in the cabin. Despite everything, Riley laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. At least in the movies, there's usually a survivor or two. What are our odds? Better than zero, Jessica said firmly. We're smart, we have resources, and we know more about what we're facing than the poor souls who got hit by this thing 500 years ago. We can survive this. A proximity alarm blared, and Derek's voice came over the intercom. They're through the first barrier. Moving to the secondary door. I'm ready to activate the electrical grid on your command. Marcus ran back to the monitoring station, seeing on the cameras that at least a dozen creatures had forced their way through Tommy's reinforcements and were now attacking the sealed hatch that led to the equipment bay's interior. Their hands were torn and damaged from their efforts, but they didn't seem to care or even notice. Do it, Marcus said. Derek threw the switch, and every light in the station dimmed as massive amounts of electricity diverted to the equipment bay. On the cameras, they could see the creatures on the metal floor convulsing as the current hit them. For a moment, Marcus felt hope. The creatures fell, their bodies twitching and smoking slightly. But then, impossibly, they began to move again. Slowly at first, then with increasing coordination, they pulled themselves up and resumed their attack on the door, barely slowed. "It's not working!" Derek shouted over the hum of the electrical system. "They should be dead, fried, but they're still coming." Marcus watched in horror as the truth became clear. Whatever these things were, they were so far beyond normal biology that conventional methods couldn't stop them. The cold didn't slow them, electrical shock didn't kill them, physical damage barely registered. They were like machines wearing meat suits, driven by something that didn't care about the body's limitations. "Shut it down," he ordered Derek. "We're just wasting power." The lights came back to full strength as Derek cut the electrical feed. On the monitors, the creatures continued their assault, and the secondary door was beginning to buckle. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before they're through," Tommy estimated, watching the door's stress indicators climb. "We can't fight them here. We need to evacuate." "In this storm?" Riley protested. "We'll die out there." "We'll definitely die in here," Tommy countered. "At least out there we've got a chance." Marcus was torn. Every option seemed to lead to death, just in different forms. Then Amanda's voice came over the intercom, urgent and scared. "Marcus, get to medical now. It's Brandon." They rushed to the medical bay, where Amanda had Brandon strapped to an examination table, not as a restraint but to monitor his vitals with the limited equipment they had. Brandon was conscious but sweating profusely despite the cool temperature, and his eyes had taken on a glassy, unfocused quality. "When did this start?" Marcus asked. Amanda was checking readings on her instruments. "About 5 minutes ago." His temperature spiked to 104, then dropped to 96. His heart rate is all over the place, and his neurological responses are off the charts. Something's happening to him, and it's happening fast. Brandon tried to speak, his voice slurred. "Feel weird. Cold. So cold, but I can't stop sweating. What's happening to me?" Marcus took his hand, feeling the clammy skin. "You're going to be okay. We're going to figure this out." But even as he said it, he didn't know if it was true. Amanda pulled him aside, speaking quietly. "I've given him every broad-spectrum antibiotic and antiviral we have. Nothing's working. Whatever this infection is, it's like nothing I've ever seen. It's rewriting his cellular structure in real time. If this continues, in a few hours he'll be like those things outside." Marcus felt the weight of command crushing down on him. Every decision he made seemed to lead to more disaster. "Is there anything we can do?" Amanda's expression was anguished. "I don't know. Maybe if we had a real hospital, advanced equipment, specialists. But here? I'm doing everything I can, and it's not enough." A crash echoed through the station, louder than anything before. Derek's panicked voice came over the intercom. "They're through. The creatures are in the equipment bay." Marcus made his decision. "Everyone gear up. We're taking the escape vehicle. Move now." The team scrambled to gather essential supplies and don their cold weather gear. Marcus helped Brandon, who could barely stand now, while Amanda grabbed her medical kit. They moved as quickly as they could to the garage module, where the escape vehicle sat waiting. It was designed to hold 6 people uncomfortably, and they were 7, but they'd make it work. Tommy was already starting the engine when the station's power flickered. "They must have reached the generator," he said, gunning the motor. "We gotta go, now." Marcus was helping Brandon into the vehicle when the younger man suddenly convulsed, his back arching unnaturally. Amanda tried to stabilize him, but Brandon's eyes rolled back, and for a moment, he went completely still. Then he moved, but it wasn't Brandon anymore. His eyes snapped open, but they were different, the pupils dilated to the point where they were almost entirely black, and that terrible, wrong coordination they'd seen in the creatures outside now animated his limbs. He grabbed Amanda's arm with inhuman strength, pulling her toward his mouth, which opened far too wide. No! Marcus swung the fire axe he'd been carrying, not at Brandon but at the arm holding Amanda, forcing him to release her. Brandon, or what used to be Brandon, turned its attention to Marcus, that rattling growl emanating from its throat. Tommy pulled Amanda away while Jessica helped Marcus back toward the vehicle. "We have to leave him," she shouted. It was the most horrible thing Marcus had ever done, abandoning a team member, but the thing that used to be Brandon was already attacking, moving with that horrible speed and strength. Marcus jumped into the vehicle, and Tommy hit the garage door control. The door began to rise, revealing the howling storm outside, but also the way out. Tommy put the vehicle in gear and accelerated hard, the heavy snow tracks churning through the accumulated snow. Behind them, the station's lights flickered and died completely as the creatures overwhelmed the generator. They'd made it perhaps 100 yards when Riley, who was watching their back trail through the rear window, screamed. "They're following us. They're all following us." Marcus looked back and saw she was right. Dozens of figures were emerging from the darkness, running through the storm with impossible speed, their ancient furs whipping in the wind. The escape vehicle was fast, but in these conditions, their speed was limited. And the creatures seemed unaffected by the cold, the wind, or the terrain. "Can we go faster?" Marcus shouted to Tommy over the engine's roar. "This is it, man. Any faster and we'll flip or crash." Tommy's knuckles were white on the controls as he navigated by the limited visibility the headlights provided. Derek was trying the radio, scanning all frequencies. "I've got something. Faint signal, bearing northeast. Might be another outpost." "How far?" Marcus asked. Derek did quick math based on the signal strength. 20, maybe 30 miles. "But I'm not sure this is our people. The transmission's weird, lots of static, but I think it's automated, like an emergency beacon." It was the best option they had. "Go for it," Marcus told Tommy, who adjusted their bearing. The creatures were still behind them, visible in brief flashes when the wind parted the snow, closing the distance slowly but steadily. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank, enough to make 30 miles if they didn't hit any obstacles or get stuck. The next hour was a nightmare of white-knuckle driving in constant fear. The storm seemed to be lessening slightly, or maybe they were just getting numb to it. Either way, visibility improved enough that they could see the terrain ahead, a mixed blessing since it revealed how treacherous their path was. Crevasses and ice formations appeared with little warning, forcing Tommy to make split-second decisions that could mean life or death. The creatures remained in pursuit, never falling more than a few hundred yards behind, tireless and determined. Jessica was monitoring their path on a GPS unit. "We're getting close to the signal source. Should be just over that ridge ahead." They crested the ridge, and below them, barely visible through the snow, was another research station. This one was bigger than Outpost Delta, probably designed for a larger team. But something was wrong. The lights were on, but they flickered irregularly, and no movement was visible outside. "Could be Station Gamma," Derek said, checking his coordinates. "This is about where they should be." Tommy drove down the slope toward the station, and as they got closer, they could see damage to the structure. Doors were hanging open, equipment was scattered in the snow, and ominous dark stains marked the pristine white ground. "I got a bad feeling about this," Tommy said, echoing everyone's thoughts. "We don't have a choice," Marcus replied. "We're almost out of fuel, and those things are still behind us. This is the only shelter for 50 miles in any direction." They pulled up to the station's garage, and Marcus checked outside before opening the door. The creatures that had been pursuing them had fallen back slightly, visible in the distance but not immediately attacking. "They're waiting for something," Amanda said, her voice hollow with exhaustion and grief over losing Brandon. "Or they're hurting us," Jessica suggested darkly. Either way, they couldn't stay in the vehicle. Marcus led the way into the station, fire axe ready, while the others followed with whatever improvised weapons they'd grabbed. The interior was a disaster. Equipment was overturned, walls were scratched and dented, and the lights flickered from what must be failing power. But worse was the silence. A station this size should have had at least a dozen people, but there was no one, living or dead. "Hello?" Marcus called out. "This is Dr. Webb from Outpost Delta. Is anyone here?" No response except the echo of his own voice and the hum of struggling machinery. They moved through the station carefully, checking each module. In the common area, they found signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, and more of those dark stains. Derek found a tablet that was still powered on, showing logs from the station's final days. He read aloud, "Day 1, discovered unusual ice formation with embedded organic material. Day 3, preliminary analysis shows preserved human remains of significant age. Day 7, accident in the lab, containment breach, Dr. Stevens exposed to sample material. Day 8, Stevens is sick, high fever, violent outbursts. We've quarantined him. Day 9, Stevens died last night, but this morning he was moving again. It's impossible, but we all saw it. Day 10, Stevens broke quarantine. 3 team members infected. We've sealed the infected sections, but they're strong, so much stronger than they should be. Sending distress calls. Day 11. Derek paused, his voice shaking. Day 11, most of the team is gone now. The infected are everywhere. We tried to burn them, but they don't die. They don't die. I'm sealing myself in the communication room. If anyone finds this, don't trust the ice. Whatever's in it, it's not dead, just sleeping. And now it's waking up. God help us all." The log ended there, dated 3 days ago. The team stood in silence, absorbing the horror of what had happened here. "They're all dead or turned," Riley said quietly. "This is where our future's heading if we don't stop this thing." "Stop it how?" Tommy asked. "We can't kill them, can't slow them down. We're scientists, not soldiers. What the hell are we supposed to do?" Marcus was thinking, trying to connect the dots. The infection preserved bodies in ice, allowed them to reanimate when thawed, made them incredibly strong and resilient, but it had to have a weakness. Everything did. Fire doesn't work, electricity doesn't work, cold is what preserves them. What about heat? Sustained heat? Amanda caught his meaning. You want to burn them? Really burn them, like incineration? The log said they tried fire, but maybe not hot enough or sustained enough. If we could raise the temperature enough to destroy the cellular structure completely. It was a long shot, but it was something. Derek had been examining the station's systems. This place has an industrial incinerator, used for waste disposal. If we could lure the creatures into a confined space and hit them with extreme heat, it might work. Might, Jessica repeated. That's a lot of our lives to bet on might. You got a better idea? Tommy asked, not unkindly. Nobody did. So they formed a plan, desperate and dangerous, but it was all they had. They would use themselves as bait, drawing the creatures into the station's lower level where the incinerator was located, then trap them and activate the burn cycle. Simple in concept, potentially fatal in execution. They spent the next hour preparing, rigging the lower level with anything flammable they could find, ensuring the incinerator had fuel, and setting up a remote activation system that Derek cobbled together from spare parts. This is literally the dumbest plan ever, Tommy said, but he was helping anyway because what else could they do? When everything was ready, Marcus looked at his team. They were exhausted, terrified, and way out of their depth. But they were also brave, resourceful, and stubborn as hell. Okay, listen up. I know I'm supposed to give some inspiring speech right now, but I got nothing. This sucks, our chances are terrible, and we might all die. But I'd rather die fighting than give up. So let's show these frozen nightmares what happens when they mess with climate scientists who've dealt with tenure committees and grant proposals. We've survived worse. It was a terrible speech, but it made Riley laugh, which was something. They opened the station's main doors and turned on every light and noisemaker they had, making the station a beacon in the storm. It didn't take long for the creatures to respond. They emerged from the darkness, dozens of them now, maybe more, all converging on the station's location. Phase 1, Marcus said, and they activated their plan. Tommy and Riley were stationed at the lower-level entrance, ready to open the blast doors that led to the incinerator chamber. Derek was at the control panel, ready to slam those doors shut once the creatures were inside. Jessica and Amanda were with Marcus in the upper level, making noise and drawing the creatures' attention. The first of the infected charged into the station, and the team executed the plan. They ran, deliberately slow enough to be pursued but fast enough to stay ahead, leading the creatures through the station toward the lower level. Behind them, more and more of the infected poured in, including one that Marcus recognized with a sick jolt as Brandon, though there was nothing of his colleague left in that shambling horror. They reached the lower level, and Tommy threw open the blast doors. The incinerator chamber was large, designed to handle significant amounts of waste, big enough to hold all the creatures if they could lure them in. "Come on, you frozen freaks!" Riley shouted, standing at the entrance and making herself a target. The creatures, driven by whatever instinct or intelligence guided them, surged toward her. Marcus's heart was in his throat as Riley waited, letting more and more of the infected enter the chamber. "Riley, now!" Tommy shouted, and she dove aside as the blast door began to close. Creatures were still trying to get through, and the door was grinding against the ones caught in the opening. "It's not closing!" Derek yelled, fighting with the controls. Tommy ran to the door and began physically pushing on it, using all his weight to force it shut against the creatures trying to get through. Marcus joined him, and together they managed to seal the door, the heavy locks engaging with a solid clunk. Inside the chamber, they could hear the creatures pounding and scratching, but the door was designed to contain industrial heat. It would hold. "Do it!" Marcus ordered, and Derek activated the incinerator. Through the thick observation window, they watched as flames erupted in the chamber, fed by the accelerants they'd placed and the incinerator's powerful burners. The temperature gauge began climbing rapidly, 1,000 degrees, 1,500, 2,000. Inside, the creatures were burning, but horribly, they didn't burn like normal organic matter. They thrashed and moved even as their flesh charred and their bones became visible through the flames. It took nearly 10 minutes of sustained heat before the movement finally stopped, and the creatures collapsed into smoldering ash. The team stood in horrified silence, watching the aftermath of what they'd done. "Is it over?" Amanda asked quietly. "Are they really dead now?" Marcus checked the thermal readings. Nothing was moving in the chamber, and the organic matter had been reduced to basic carbon. "Yeah, I think they're dead." They'd survived, barely, but Marcus knew this wasn't over. This was just one group of creatures, in one location. If Amanda's theory was right, and the melting glaciers were releasing infected bodies across the Arctic, this same scenario could be playing out at research stations, indigenous communities, and remote outposts across the northern regions. Derek had managed to get the station's communication array working, boosting the signal with the larger equipment available at Station Gamma. "I'm broadcasting on all emergency frequencies, warning about the situation and what we've learned. Someone needs to know what's coming." Over the next hour, as they rested and began to process the trauma they'd experienced, responses started coming in. First, confused acknowledgments from other research teams asking for clarification. Then, more urgent messages from stations reporting similar encounters with hostile entities emerging from melting ice. A military frequency even chimed in, gruff voices demanding information about a potential biological threat. Marcus took the radio and began explaining, knowing he sounded insane but having the evidence to back it up. He told them about the infection, the preserved bodies, the creature's resistance to conventional methods of destruction. He detailed the incinerator protocol that had worked for them. Most importantly, he warned them that this was just the beginning. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to clear. Through the station's windows, they could see the sun for the first time in days, reflecting off the endless white landscape. Beautiful and deadly, just like everything else in this frozen hell. "Rescue's coming," Derek announced, having coordinated with the military and civilian authorities. Choppers will be here in a few hours, plus a full quarantine and research team. They're taking this seriously. Marcus stepped outside, breathing the cold air, and looked toward the glacier that had started all this. Even from here, he could see the dark stains in the ice where bodies were embedded, slowly being revealed as the ancient freeze released its prisoners. How many more were out there? Hundreds? Thousands? And it wasn't just happening here. Every melting glacier on Earth could potentially be a time bomb, releasing pathogens and preserved infected from ages past. What are you thinking? Jessica had joined him outside, wrapped in her heavy coat. I'm thinking we open Pandora's box, Marcus said. And I'm thinking we can't close it again. The planet's warming, the ice is melting, and there's nothing we can do to stop it fast enough. Whatever's locked in those glaciers is coming out, one way or another. So what do we do? Marcus turned to look at her and the rest of his team, survivors who'd faced the impossible and lived. We do what we always do. We study it, we learn from it, and we find a way to survive it. We document everything, share the information, develop protocols. Humanity's faced plagues before. We're still here. This feels different, Jessica said. It is different. But we're different too. We know it's coming now, and knowledge is our best weapon. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance signaled the arrival of help. As the military transport came into view, Marcus knew their ordeal was ending, but a much larger battle was just beginning. The story of what happened at Outpost Delta and Station Gamma would spread, become legend, maybe be dismissed by some as hysteria. But Marcus and his team would keep telling it, keep warning anyone who would listen. The Earth was giving up its frozen dead, and the world needed to be ready. As they prepared to evacuate, Amanda pulled Marcus aside. Brandon deserves better than what happened to him. They all do, everyone who died here. I know, Marcus said. We'll make sure people remember. We'll make sure their sacrifice means something. The helicopter landed, and soldiers poured out, weapons ready, wearing hazmat gear. An officer approached Marcus. Dr. Webb? We need you and your team to come with us for quarantine and debriefing. Your transmissions got people at the highest levels freaking out. Is it really as bad as you said? Marcus looked back at the station, at the glacier beyond, at the landscape that held countless frozen secrets. Officer, it's worse. What we faced here is just the tip of the iceberg, literally. We need to start scanning every melting glacier, establishing protocols, preparing for what's coming. Because it is coming, and we're not ready. We'll do what we can, the officer said, though his expression suggested he wasn't sure anyone could do enough. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the nightmare, Marcus watched the frozen landscape recede below. Somewhere down there, ancient evils were thawing, preserved horrors were awakening, and the clock was ticking on humanity's ability to respond. But they'd survived. Against impossible odds, they'd fought back and won, at least this battle. And Marcus vowed that every battle to come, he'd be there, armed with knowledge and determination. The frozen dead were rising, but the living weren't giving up without a fight. The helicopter banked south, toward civilization, toward safety, toward a world that was about to learn that climate change brought dangers no one had ever imagined. And in the ice below, ancient eyes that were not quite dead and not quite alive stared up at the warming sky, waiting for their turn to walk the earth once more. The story of Outpost Delta was over, but the real terror, the global catastrophe, was only just beginning.